The echoes of roaring crowds, the chants of his name, and the deafening sound of the final bell. Those memories lingered in Mark the Hammer Thompson's mind like faint whispers of a past life. It had been nearly a decade since Mark retired from the boxing ring. Once a household name, feared by opponents and adored by fans, he now lived a quiet life in a small, modest house on the edge of town. His championship belts hung on the wall, gathering dust, relics of a career that had been filled with triumph and heartbreak. Mark had it all once: fame, fortune, and success. But he had paid a price for it, a price far greater than he ever imagined. In his pursuit of glory, he had burned bridges, pushed away the people who had stood by him, and neglected the relationships that should have mattered most. His coach, the man who had taken him under his wing and guided him to victory, hadn't spoken to him in years. His best friend, Jake, walked out after a bitter argument that left a scar on both their hearts. And Lisa, the woman he once loved deeply, had left him when the demands of his career became more than their relationship could bear. Now, as he sat alone in his quiet living room, Mark wondered what it had all been for. The cheers of the crowd had long faded, and the people he once cared about were gone. All that remained were memories and regrets. One cold afternoon, as Mark stared out of the window at the gray sky, he heard a knock at the door. It was an unusual sound. Visitors had become rare over the years, and Mark was hesitant as he walked to the door and opened it. Standing on the doorstep was a young man, barely in his 20s, with the build of an athlete and a determined look in his eyes. Mark recognized that look. It was the same hunger, the same burning desire he had once carried in his youth. "Mr. Thompson?" the young man asked, his voice a mixture of nervousness and respect. "My name's Ryan. I've been training at the local gym, and I've heard a lot about you. They say you were one of the greatest, and I was wondering if you could help me. I'm trying to make it in boxing, but I need someone who's been there, someone who knows what it takes to be a champion." Mark leaned against the doorframe, studying the young man. He could see the fire in Ryan's eyes, the same fire that had driven him to push harder, fight longer, and never give up. But he also saw something else, something that Ryan didn't yet understand. The cost, the sacrifices, the pain that came with the glory. "I don't train fighters anymore," Mark said flatly. He was about to close the door when Ryan's face fell, his expression a mixture of disappointment and desperation. "I get it," Ryan said quickly. "I know you're probably done with this stuff, but if you could just give me a few tips, maybe some advice, it would mean the world to me." Mark paused. He had walked away from the boxing world for a reason. The sport had given him everything, but it had also taken everything. Still, something about Ryan's earnestness made Mark hesitate. He could see a younger version of himself in the kid, so full of dreams, so unaware of the road ahead. "All right," Mark said at last. "Come in." Over the next few weeks, what started as a few training sessions turned into something more. Mark found himself reluctantly drawn back into the world of boxing through Ryan's enthusiasm. The young man had talent, no doubt about it, but more than that, he had drive. Ryan worked hard, pushed himself beyond his limits, and absorbed everything Mark taught him like a sponge. But as Mark watched Ryan train, he began to notice patterns that were all too familiar. The same tunnel vision he had once had, the single-minded obsession with winning. Ryan's drive was impressive, but Mark could see the danger in it, the same danger that had led him down a path of loneliness and regret. "You need to take a step back sometimes," Mark advised one evening after an intense session. "It's not just about what happens in the ring. Life outside of it matters too." Ryan, panting from the workout, wiped sweat from his brow and nodded, though Mark could tell he wasn't really listening. "Yeah, but this is my shot, Mark. I've got to give it everything I've got." Mark could hear the echoes of his own past in those words. He remembered the countless times he had pushed people away because he thought winning was the only thing that mattered. He remembered the nights spent training instead of being with the people he loved, and the phone calls he had ignored because he thought they could wait until after his next fight. As the weeks passed, Mark found himself growing more attached to Ryan. The kid reminded him of his younger self, but he also saw an opportunity. Perhaps this was his chance to make things right, to guide Ryan away from the mistakes he had made, to show him that there was more to life than fame and success. One evening, after a particularly grueling training session, Mark sat with Ryan in the gym. For the first time, he opened up about his past, not just the victories and the belts, but the pain, the losses, and the regrets. "I had it all once," Mark said, staring at the floor. "The fame, the titles, the money. But I lost people along the way. My coach, my best friend, Lisa, they're all gone. I was so focused on winning that I didn't see what I was losing. Don't make the same mistake I did, Ryan." Ryan listened quietly, his face thoughtful. "But you were a champion," he said after a long pause. "Isn't that what it's all about?" Mark shook his head. "Being a champion in the ring is one thing, but outside of it, I was a failure. I don't want that for you. Success is important, but not at the cost of everything else." Ryan looked down, absorbing Mark's words. For the first time, he seemed to understand what Mark was trying to say. The fire in his eyes hadn't dimmed, but now there was something else, a sense of balance, a recognition that there was more to life than just winning. Over time, Mark continued to train Ryan, but their relationship evolved. It wasn't just about boxing anymore. It was about life. Mark saw Ryan not just as a fighter, but as someone he could mentor. Someone he could help guide toward a future that wasn't filled with the same regrets he carried. And in the process, Mark found something he hadn't expected. Redemption, a second chance to make things right. Not for himself, but for someone else.